Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 13th, 2023 public hearing, followed by the regular council meeting at the Village of Lytton. I'd like to take the moment to remind everyone to turn off their video, mute their microphones, and to allow council to begin to proceedings. Just to let you know, we're all being recorded and broadcasted on the Village of Lytton YouTube channel. If anyone is looking for this video recording or a past meeting, you can go to the Village YouTube channel and watch it there. Thank you very much. Mayor O'Connor, you may call the meeting to order.
Thank you. I will call this public hearing to order. To begin with, though, I want to recognize that the Village of Lytton is situated on the Entlecaton territory, and for that we are grateful. I'm here this evening with the entire council, which for the first time I think that we've all been in the room together, along with CAO Mombercat, and we have Mike, our recovery manager, in the room, as well as a recovery manager online for later in the meeting. So this public hearing is convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaws, Zoning Amendment Bylaw 736, 2023, and Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 739, 2023. Members of council may ask questions following the presentation by staff. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than debate the merits of the proposed bylaws. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaws. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaws. We will start the public hearing with a presentation by staff on the first bylaw for consideration, Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 736, 2023. As stated in the notice of public hearing, Zoning Amendment Bylaw 736, 2023 is proposed to update the R1 low-density residential zone to reduce the front line setback requirements for principal buildings from 6 meters to 3 meters, except where off-street parking is located between the dwelling and the front lot line. Remove the minimum house size and width requirements. Increase the allowed maximum lot coverage from 35% to 50%. Remove 2 sections from the R1 zone, minimum house size and minimum house width. I will pass it now on to Planner Corey Gain to explain the bylaw. Corey?
Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. I'm going to share my screen now. All right. There we are. All right, so as Mayor O'Connor mentioned, we're here to consider 2 bylaws. I'm going to present the first one, then we'll take a break and I'll present a second bylaw. As the Mayor O'Connor read to you, the purpose of this particular amending bylaw is to amend Schedule A of the zoning bylaw, Section 6, the R1 low density residential zone, and its subsection 6.2 regulations. It will be deleting the existing table and replacing it with a new table. This is what that new table looks like. This was discussed a couple of times by council, and cumulatively the changes were to the front lot line, to reduce it from the 6 meters to 3 meters, except where there is a driveway located between the house and the property line adjacent to the road, and to increase the maximum lot coverage. Those were the 2 main changes, and then it was identified that some of the other restrictions were perhaps no longer appropriate for the community, so they were removed, and that would be the minimum dimensions. So that is really all I have to say about that particular bylaw. So I'm going to unshare my screen now, and I will wait for consideration of the next bylaw.
Thank you. So we will now open the floor for submissions from the public. If you're present in the hall, which I don't think we have anyone here, raise your hand. But of course, if you're online, please use the raise your hand function. When speaking, please commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address. We will call 3 times for each speaker. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes per call to a maximum of 3 calls to speak, or 15 minutes in total. After all speakers have an opportunity to speak, a person may speak a second time. After all speakers have had an opportunity to speak a second time, a person may speak a third time. Those in attendance and speaking during a public hearing must follow the rules of order as set out in the most recent version of the Council Procedure Bylaw. So for the first time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw? Or a second time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw? And for a third time and final time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw?
Mayor Connor, there are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Elba. Elba, now, do you have any correspondence received?
At this time, Mayor Connor, we did not receive any correspondence.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We will now move on to the second bylaw for consideration, which is the zoning amendment bylaw number 739, 2023. As stated in the notice of public hearing, zoning amendment bylaw number 739, 2023 is proposed to update the C1 general commercial zone. General commercial zone to, I lost my place, I apologize, to include single detached dwellings as a permitted principal use where a dwelling existed or was under construction as of June 30th, 2021. Reconstruction must meet all other zoning bylaw regulations, including but not limited to setbacks and lot coverage. Again, I will pass this over to Planner Corey Gain to explain this bylaw.
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Connor. Yes, very straightforward, as you suggested. What that looks like in practice is Schedule A, Section 8, the C1 General Commercial Zone, subsection 8.1 permitted uses will be amended by adding single detached dwellings with a note that there must have been a dwelling in existence or lawfully under construction as of the date of the fire. And the intent here is that we saw there were a number of properties that had single detached dwellings on them pre-fire, even though they were non-conforming with what was imagined as a future land use. We would like to make it possible for those people to replace their dwellings. So we've also amended at subsection 8.6 to provide some guidance in that regard. So as you mentioned, reconstruction must meet all other zoning bylaw regulations. That concludes my comments on that particular bylaw.
Thank you, Corey. So we'll now open the floor for submissions from the public again. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Of course, online, use the raise hand button. I will call 3 times for speakers. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes per call to a maximum of 3 calls to speak, or 15 minutes in total. After all speakers have an opportunity to speak, a person may speak a second time. After all speakers have had an opportunity to speak a second time, a person may speak a third time. So for the first time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw? I see no hands raised. So for the second time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw? Again, no hands raised. And so for the third and final time, would anyone like to speak to this bylaw?
Mayor Connor, there are no raised hands at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. CEO Bannon, could you report out any correspondence received on this bylaw?
Yes, at this time, we have not received any correspondence for this bylaw.
Thank you very much. So to council, could I please get a motion to close this public hearing?
I'll move that all written and oral submissions regarding proposed bylaws number 736 and number 739, including the public hearing held on September 13th, be received and that the hearing be closed.
Need a seconder?
Second that.
Thank you. And all those in favor? Carried. So please note that council members are not permitted to receive any new information or correspondence from the public on these bylaws now that the public hearing is closed. We will now move on to our regular council meeting. So I call our regular council meeting to order at 7:13 p.m. We will begin by adopting the agenda. So who would like to make that motion? Go ahead, Councilor Lytton.
I move that council adopt the September 13th, 2023 agenda for the regular council meeting as presented.
And a seconder. Thank you, Councilor McCann, and all those in favor. Carried. Now we'll move on to adoption of the minutes of the most recent previous council meeting of August 23rd. Who would like to move adoption of those?
I'll move that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on August 23rd, 2023 be adopted as presented.
Great, a seconder. Councillor McCann, are there any errors or omissions? You noted any? Great. So all those in favor of adopting those minutes and carried. So we'll move right on to item number 6, which is public comment on matters related to the agenda. And I'll turn it back over to CEO Bannon.
Thank you very much, Mayor Connor. Members of the public are now invited to comment on matters related to the agenda. If you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. You can find that by clicking on reactions at the bottom of your screen and then clicking raised hand. When it's your turn, I will read your name and will ask you to unmute yourself. You will get a pop-up on your screen asking you to unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak per speaker. If anyone would like to speak, please use the raise hand function. If anyone would like to speak, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. And third and last time, if anyone would like to speak, please use the raise hand function. There are no raise hands right now. Mayor Connor, thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll move right on to item number 7.1, our staff reports and presentations. And I'll turn it over to CEO Bannon. Sorry, CAO Robert.
Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. This first item that I have for you on the agenda tonight has to do with the terms of reference for the Senior Project Advisory Committee. And you may remember we had a discussion and a report on this. I think it was on the May 24th council meeting where we approved the establishment of this committee. Recently, we've been doing some work on some of the other committees, and through that process, we kind of come to light that the membership for this committee should potentially be expanded. And so we had initially included representatives from LFN, and then on reflection and with further discussion, we thought it was a good idea to recommend expanding the membership to include representatives from each one of the bands surrounding the village. And so in the membership section of the terms of reference, I've expanded it to include those other organizations. And then the other change that was proposed in this is to adjust the chair of the committee. Initially, it was written that it would be the CAO, And now we're proposing that we switch that to be the mayor, would be the chair of this committee. So those two changes are what are in that revised document, and we're looking for council's approval to make those changes.
So we have a recommended motion here. But who would like to make the recommended motion? Councillor Lightfoot.
I'll put the motion on the table that council approve the updated terms of reference attached for the Senior Project Advisory Committee.
And a seconder? I'll second that. It's Councillor Michelle. And are there any questions or comments regarding this? Councillor.
I'm not sure that I can do it, but I think that as far as the membership goes, I would suggest that perhaps the village have 2 people on this committee, especially since the mayor would be the chair. I think it might be advantageous to have a council member in addition to the mayor sit there just to be more engaged in the conversation and be able to record it in a more accurate way, perhaps.
So
That was my comment as well.
Councillor McCann. Are there any other comments or questions regarding that, please? So Councillor Lightfoot, so how would you like
So
to?
could I make an amendment that membership be changed to include 2 members from the village of Lytton, one being the mayor and one a designate that perhaps is selected randomly or in I really don't care how.
Okay,
But I think there needs to be a second person,
But the terms of reference would say that.
2 members from the
members.
village of Lytton, one being the mayor.
Yeah, okay. So that's an amendment to this motion, is that right? Yeah. Okay,
Second that amended
so,
version.
okay, so we have a seconder for the amended motion. And so any other discussion? All those in favor of the amended motion?
Yeah.
And carried. CO Banman, did you get that?
I did,
Down.
Mayor O'Connor. I did. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to item number 7.1.2 and back over to CAO Burkett.
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Connor. So this report is to seek council's direction just on moving forward with the establishment of an overall committee structure. So in the report, there's a number of committees that are outlined and a short description of each one. So some of these are kind of the typical committee that a municipal government would have, and some of them are a little bit specific to Lytton ourselves. Like for example, we're suggesting that for standing committees, we would have a finance audit committee. That's very typical. A personnel / HR committee. A protective services committee, so that would include fire, police, and emergency operations planning and execution. A rebuilding committee, that of course is unique to Lytton. And eventually a governance and ethics committee. So those would be suggested as being the standing committees. The select committees would include things such as the Senior Project Advisory Committee we just discussed, a housing committee, a capital infrastructure planning committee that would include water, wastewater, roads, any of those types of things. An economic development committee, a cemetery committee, an accessibility and inclusion committee. That's an area that is becoming more and more in the forefront, and people are thinking about that and talking about it more, and municipal governments have more requirements around that, and we'll talk about that in a later meeting. But that's kind of a newer area. And then eventually, an arts and culture advisory committee, a parks and rec committee, those types of committees that are used on an ongoing basis to advocate, plan, execute, research events for the village, for both the community and for visitors. So at this point, we're not going to run out and establish all of these committees at once, right? This is intended to be, just some direction around whether or not this looks like the right slate of committees, and then they'll come back one by one to council for approval with terms of reference and much more detail kind of fleshed out per committee. The final thing that I'll say is we just had a short discussion there about membership on a committee. We will also establish kind of a process for council to nominate or select members of council to participate in these committees. And typically what happens is you look at all those external requests for participation. So that's, committees such as, the NDIT and the health planning table and TNRD and all those different, and you balance that workload with our own committee structure workload, just to make sure everybody's got an opportunity to participate and kind of share the work around a little bit. So that's all I have to really say about it at this time, unless somebody has any specific questions.
Okay, well, let's put the motion on the floor first. Who would like to make this recommended motion?
I'm trying to find.
I'll make.
Thank you, Councillor Michelle.
That council direct the CAO to establish the committees outlined in Appendix A by bringing back to council terms of reference, including proposed membership for approval.
Okay, and the seconder?
I'll second that.
Great, now any questions or comments for CIO? Okay, Councillor Lightfoot.
I'm just wondering where the museum might fit in this. Historically, the museum was a commission of the village. So I believe that the assets from the museum probably are equally village assets. And I believe there was some insurance from that also. So I'm not sure. I think historically it was a select committee. I was a member from council on that. And I think it might be worthwhile to have that as a separate independent category. Okay. If I can continue.
Yes.
And I'm also wondering, historically we had, we called it regional sub-governance meetings with the surrounding First Nations and the TNRD, just to talk about things like emergency preparedness, common issues that we might want to work on together. I'm not sure exactly where it would fit in this list. Maybe protective services, but it was more of a select committee also, where there was just one or two members from council that, one or two members from the other First Nation community. So this list is good. I'm just thinking I want to expand it. Having said that, I'm looking at the workload, I'm tired already.
Yeah, looking at the list myself, it is an extensive list. And I think as time goes on, we may recognize, others that need organizing, and we may realize that maybe some aren't needed, right? So as time goes on, yeah. Okay, Councillor Toss.
Yeah, same on that same note, just fully in support of this motion, just recognizing that perhaps it is a organic situation and it's fluid, and there'll be opportunity to sort of tweak it, how it best fits. I specifically have some suggestions around maybe consolidating some of the committees, because I'm assuming this will take up a lot of staff time with minutes and agendas and whatnot. So I suppose that's for another day, but I do have a question around the unmet needs. Is that still meeting?
I'm gonna ask Mike Blaschuk to speak to that, because I think you're involved in it.
Yes, so I do attend all the unmet needs meetings, and they're looking at sort of restructuring what their terms of reference should be, and thinking they're more along the lines of supporting something like a rebuild. It's mentioned there, is what the area is doing as well, and linking that into volunteer as well, so that somehow the things you can rebuild or volunteer sort of broaden up.
Yeah.
And they're looking on the terms of reference right now.
And we did have them listed under the other committees that the village participates in.
Saw that, yeah.
Because we haven't been kind of driving that committee,
Right.
but we do participate in it. So I tried to distinguish, kind of based on that.
And does the chamber have a formalized role for a council member? I don't believe it did in the past.
Yeah, okay.
I think
Would it be nice to-
many years ago,
Right,
council member went as a representative of
Right.
council, but yeah. Councilor Lights.
So, given that the preamble in this, did state that not all these committees would be established immediately, is it possible that we could add to the list for future consideration the museum, sub-regional, and, actually the Chamber of Commerce is a really good idea. It may dovetail with, the Economic Committee.
Yeah.
Please, where would be?
Not that they need to be realized immediately, but that there's this, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Theo Bandman, I wonder if you could request that everyone mute their mics that is on the call as guests. Or if I could, I guess.
Yes, if I could just ask everyone to just keep themselves muted. I think somebody unmuted by mistake, that's all. So,
No
no
problem.
problem. Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
sorry, I cut you off. Was that it then, Councilor Lightfoot? Or
Yes,
did you-
thank you.
Yeah, okay. If there are no other comments or questions, all those in favor of this motion? Carried. All right. Now we will move on to item number 7.1.3, I believe it is. And back over again to CIO Diane.
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Connor. So we have with us on the call tonight Bob McPherson. And so we've been working with Bob to do some research into some options for how we might adjust our, I'm not gonna say building bylaw, because we're not looking to adjust the building bylaw, but to adjust some of our documents, provide some guidance around some fire resiliency standards and some other items like that. So Bob has had a long career in municipal government, was recently a CAO of a town on the island, is retired now, and we dragged him out of retirement to help us with this project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Bob, to do your presentation.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening, Your Worship and councillors. And looks like we've got the presentation coming up. Thank you very much. So I'll just cue to go through slides. Want to acknowledge that I'm joining you tonight from the territory of the Tolokwit First Nation. Reporting to council tonight, as the CAO mentioned, on some of the options the council has for seeing the community get built for fire resiliency. Next slide, please. You'll be delighted to know this is a very brief presentation. I'm going to go very quickly through some background approaches and implications, then go through the recommendations. And of course, if council wishes, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. And this is all in support of the recommendations that council has in their report. This presentation, yeah, it's just really just kind of a tops of the waves sort of thing. So as we all know, wildfires are a natural occurrence. They have been a natural part of how the forest has managed itself for millennia. In more recent or not quite recent history, as forests have become a source of economy, there has been a lot of emphasis placed on fire suppression. And I note the 10 a.m. policy where the U.S. Forest Service, if a fire started one day, it was meant to be under control by 10 a.m. the next day. This, along with climate change, has given us this wildfire paradox where the work that was done in the past, while it may have saved a lot of forest, has actually made the fires worse today. In more recent years, I would say in the last 15 years, there's more of an emphasis on controlling wildland-urban interface fires. And then even more recently, looking after some of the fires that have been seen in North America, including the Lytton fire, looking at ways that communities can harden against the possibility of wildfires flowing through from being a wildfire to an urban interface fire and becoming a wildfire disaster. Next slide, please. So the idea of hardening, in parallel with other initiatives like public infrastructure, communities are looking at how their physical presence, the physical community, can be more resistant to wildland-urban interface fires, to, again, keep those from becoming disasters. And one of the tricky parts of all this, of course, is we've not only seen fires become more intense, but there's a requirement or a need for hardening to happen, not just on buildings that government has control over, but also on lands and buildings that are privately owned. Next slide, please. So in British Columbia, there are a number of pieces of legislation that enable local governments to do some things to protect their communities from potential natural disasters. Within the legislation in the Local Government Act, there is an opportunity for community plans to make policy statements of all sorts related to disasters, mitigating and avoiding disasters, or as I think the language used to say, protection of development from natural disasters. Local governments can establish development permit areas that go a little bit further than just general policy, and those development permit areas can then have guidelines for how we are meant to build in areas where we know there is potential for certain types of disasters. And the legislation specifically names wildfire as one of those disasters. Both of these approaches are relatively simple for a local government to implement. And the one thing to note is development permit guidelines would, if adopted, have a short-term cost to owners and builders. So there are examples in the report that is before council this evening. And there are other examples that council is, I think, aware of that start to prescribe or say, when building, thou shalt build with, or you should build with, or it's encouraged to build with certain types of materials. Next slide, please. So that covered policy. There are also opportunities that are regulatory for local government that move away from should to you must. So more like a speed limit. You must meet these requirements. So one of the things that's available is through the Local Government Act. Again, local governments can prescribe landscape management practices and landscape materials that are to be used to reduce the hazard from wildfire. And it seems to us looking at this now that as much of the landscape in Lytton needs to be reestablished, this could be a fairly low cost option for owners, where rather than using plant material X, they use plant material Y, and then select plant materials that and other materials that have less opportunity for fire to spread. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, can you go back? I jumped the gun there. Thank you. I might have jumped over that one on purpose. Local governments can enhance building regulations, and this is something that Lytton Council is certainly familiar with. Local governments can initiate what's called a variance to BC Building Code that applies to all of the province except for Vancouver. This is very challenging business. Building requirements are quite technical and challenging to put those kinds of requirements together, especially for a small local government. And the recommendations the council has seen will speak to maybe another approach to this. Next slide, please. So one of the things that has come up in speaking with your CAO and others is the idea that maybe we can get better information in people's hands through the good offices of the village, using website, using social media, and then as there's a physical presence, making physical materials available for people to review and read and start to understand the things that they can do to make the built environment more wildfire resistant. Again, a low cost option. What we don't know is the extent to which people will, the uptake that there will be on telling people here's a good practice to prevent wildfire from destroying homes. So if something like this is put in place, and I think a good general practice would be to monitor how well it goes. So next, please. So what is being proposed this evening is a bit of a stepwise approach, and recognizing there's a need and a desire to balance risks, to balance costs, not only to the village, but also to owners and builders as they're rebuilding their lives in Lytton. And there's also a question of timeliness, how people are quite anxious to get back home and into rebuilt homes. So trying to balance all of those things, it's recommended that council consider prioritizing 5 discrete actions. Next slide. The first priority that is being recommended is putting in place a plain language guide that I mentioned a few moments ago that helps owners and builders know what some options are for building a more resilient community through the decisions that they can make on private property. Next slide. Second priority is on the regulatory side, which would be establishing the landscape materials and landscape management regulations. And this has been done elsewhere in the province. I don't have a full inventory now, but the one I'm really familiar with in the last little while is Squamish. And they in 2019, I think, recognized, I think there may have been some fires in the Garibaldi area, and they recognized the threat to their community and started to put in place these kinds of regulations to reduce the possibility of wildfire spread. Next one, please. So on the policy side, I've generally found in my local government career that good decisions get made when there's a good policy foundation, and policy takes a bit of work. And the official community plan for Lytton is due for a review, but something that I would hope could happen in the next short while is begin to develop language around that starts to state that Lytton recognizes the threat of wildfire and is looking to make moves to reduce the threat of that wildfire becoming a disaster. In addition to that, starting to develop development permit guidelines that will start to shape what that rebuild looks like. Next slide. So fourth, and I've put an asterisk by this one, in that there might be some small moves that can be made in fairly short order, so it may not have to wait until the other 3 are completed. But I think it would be worthwhile to go back to the province and say, we've had a couple of good goes at this, and this is not really something that a community of 210 people should be responsible for doing. And as far as I can tell, there hasn't been much for wildfire resilience, wildfire resistant regulations developed for that would supplement BC Building Code. And again, it would seem to me that the province ought to take the lead on this. And it might be something that Lytton, along with other local governments that know that they have they're in a wildfire danger area, might want to work together to encourage the province to take this on. Next slide, please. And finally, once you've adopted, and I see you've done some zoning bylaw amendments tonight that I think are meant to encourage opportunities for people to get back into town. Once the official community plan has been reviewed, I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at the zoning bylaw and see if there are some things that can be addressed. And I've mentioned previously that accessory buildings are one of those challenging ones where everything else can be done really well, and accessory buildings can kind of be the tricky spot. So in time, it might be something that's worth looking at is, are there things that can be baked into a zoning bylaw that reduce the risk of a wildfire disaster? And that's the 5 recommendations. There they are all on one slide. And that concludes, next slide, that concludes my presentation. And of course, I can answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Bob. I think what we'll do is we'll put the recommended motion forward, and then we will have questions and comments that hopefully you'll be able to help us answer. So we have a very lengthy, recommended motion here. And because Bob just went through it all, I don't know that we will read it all out, but there are the five priorities here that he's listed. But who would like to attempt to make this motion, recommended motion?
I will.
Thank you, Councilor McCann.
Okay. I would like to move that the village chief administrative officer be directed to work with the village's advisors to bring forward for council consideration first priority, second priority, third priority, fourth priority, and the fifth priority items as listed on this particular thing that we have in front of us.
Thank you. A seconder, Councilor Lightfoot. Now, any questions, comments, thoughts from council? Councilor Lightfoot.
I just would like some more analysis of the second priority. Because what jumps out at me when I read it is that an act that regulates landscape material. And I know there's been a lot of pushback on that. Having said that, priority one is to educate people about what is a fire risk. But what really interests me in that particular second priority is landscape management to prevent hazardous conditions. So could that be accommodated by having a policy whereby, in particular, absentee landowners, but any landowner that allows their lot to have a large fuel load by not managing it, is there some policy, or would it be a bylaw where the village could give notice to that resident that they're creating a hazard and that they need to address it? And if they're unable to do that the village can go in and build them out for that work to reduce the hazard. Is that a policy or a bylaw?
Yeah. So I think all the things that you have mentioned there would be bylaw powers that rather than policy. So and again, all of what you have suggested there, which is that you're required to, the maintenance thing that keeps coming to mind, and maybe I'll backtrack a little bit more. When I read the account of how the fire spread in Lytton, and I don't need to tell this group, but what happened on the ground plane was pretty significant, where fire got from A to B really, really quickly by going across what I guess was, dry grass and pine straw or whatever, and then into buildings, and then from building to building. What we're trying to do here is break as many vectors as possible. And this, as I said in my presentation, seems like a relatively cheap way to go. One of the things that I've seen other communities do is prescribe which grasses can be used and which can't, and require that grass be cut short, and require that bark mulch be cleaned up, and require that pine straw be kept cleaned up, so that those vectors for fire are not as likely. Normally when there's a bylaw power and a regulation, if folks don't follow the regulation, there are a number of steps that a local government can take, which would include, the thing that you always want as a local government is voluntary compliance. So you start taking steps for voluntary compliance. Hey, you might not know. Hey, now that you do know, you need to act. Now that you've not acted, here's a fine. Okay, since you're not doing it, you're putting everybody else at risk. We're going to exercise powers that we have to enter the property and clean it up. And each of those, there's a few visits to council, I think, along the way before you're getting too involved in entering somebody's property. But it is an option the council, I think, would have and would have to have. Otherwise, the bylaw is simply a dead letter.
Thank you.
I didn't understand the answer, sorry, Bob. So is that yes or no, it could be put into a policy? Because from what I understand from Councilor Lightfoot, is that historically it was a policy where the property owner was billed if they ignored the notice or the clearing of their properties. Is that not possible, you're telling us?
If you're going to do that, I believe it is best done through a bylaw. So it's a yes, you can do it, but I don't know what kind of policy you could have that you bill somebody. To me, it belongs in a bylaw, in a regulation.
If I may, my memory may be poor, it maybe was a bylaw.
Okay.
But I know we had a mechanism where,
Was
especially
attached
as
to the
the
unsightly-
landlord.
It was attached to the unsightly bylaw. It was a bylaw, yeah.
So I stand corrected.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank
Um,
you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, so this particular item actually gets me a little bit upset because I don't feel like we actually had a wildfire. It wasn't a natural disaster. And so although I completely agree that we need to provide resiliency for our community and a safe community, I think repeatedly calling it a natural occurrence is a misnomer. So it gets me a little upset because there's some people that might argue. In fact, the Transportation Safety Board argued that it was a man-made fire. So it wasn't necessarily a wildland interface fire. Having said that, I speak strongly against all of these priorities, save the first one, because I believe in less regulation. Our poor residents have been through so much, and from my personal experience after the fire and visiting the land of the fire, what burned was far more, and not burned, more importantly, was indicative of where there was irrigation and water. And I visited the village after the fire, and my fence was there. There were stacks of wood there in areas where it was irrigated. I think we're unfairly putting this extra regulation or presenting something that could potentially be extra regulation on residents that just want to build back what they had and come back to the land. They're not going to put in a cedar hedge. They're not stupid. You know, the idea of prescribing the type of grasses that people can have, I know would probably drive the last remaining resident that we have away. It makes me quite upset to think about us adding any more regulations that are necessary. Personally, I think that everybody on this council was elected on that platform. You know, I think by building back with 2023 standards in the building code, we can have an infinitely more fire-resistant village. Prior to the fire, there was encroachments on every setback. There were tons of contravention, non-conforming units. We're not going to have that in the new village. While I see space for education and policy and support of residents and suggestions and whatever we can do, I don't see a bylaw being the answer to this particular challenge we have. It was not a wildfire disaster. We need water, we need sirens, we need a fire break. We, the village, need to do that before we tell people what kind of grass they can grow. Yeah, this one really upsets me. But another thing I think that this council could look at before we impose more bylaws on people is what mitigating factors could be put in place when certain thresholds of heat, wind, and drought are experienced. What is going to happen? Is there going to be a train car with a water car? Is there going to be a alert system put in place? What is happening? And I'm speaking quite a lot on this, but I completely do not want to support any of these priorities except number one, and potentially talking to the provincial government saying this is actually in their domain, but I am not prepared to support this resolution at all.
Are there any other comments or questions? Councillor McCann.
First of all, Bob, I was really impressed with the work that you did on this, and I would like to thank you for the in-depth attention you paid to this. I found it really helpful to read through what you researched and put together. I don't know if it's all a big lump or not, but nonetheless, I have increasingly become more and more a supporter of the fourth priority, and especially considering where we're going to be next week, I kind of think we should take advantage of that opportunity. any way that we can, because after spending a lot of time thinking about building code and going through those different changes and reading all that stuff about the wildland interface fires, there's two things that come up for me, and one is that I agree to some extent with Councillor Toss that people don't need a lot of regulating, but I also feel that it would be, I'm going to use plain English because I can't help it. I think we would look stupid as a council if we didn't acknowledge the importance of fire resiliency in rebuilding the community in as many ways as possible, and perhaps that might look like policy. So to me, I don't want to sit back 5 years from now and say, yeah, we were on council and now no, we were putting that stuff in place because we didn't think we needed to. I think it's a challenging balance. I agree with you, not making regulations so strict that nobody would ever build here. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are in this situation, that we're going to continue to be in this situation as long as we live here, and that we need to find ways of acknowledging that in the policies and procedures and whatever the village of Lytton decides to do. So for me, it's not cut and dry, but it is important that it is acknowledged somehow in moving forward. So that was nice.
I would like to add, I agree with much of what you said, Councillor Cat. And I also look at this as these 5 priorities, things for our staff to work on. They will be coming back to us. So if a bylaw is drafted, we will have input into that bylaw, what it says. You know, maybe we decide we don't want to specify what kind of grass or whatever. But I agree, I think we need some things in place because this will affect future rebuilds as well. It'll affect building on into the future, not just the immediate rebuilding, but definitely first priority is absolutely that education and options for the people that are building immediately. That's what I would like to add. Are there any other comments or questions?
I feel the same as Mayor O'Connor. I relate to both what Councillor Toss is saying, but at the same time, Councillor McCann says, but we really don't need so many regulations on the residents. And as Councillor Toss says, we need to get our stuff in order. You know, if Hobo Hollow had been cleared, maybe the fire wouldn't have been as bad. And that's back on the village, not so much the residents.
And I would agree with you, and I think that is almost like a separate conversation we need to have and decide as a village what it is we're going to be doing, whereas this one is addressing rebuilding, right? Councillor Toss first.
I agree. However, I see it as a situation of priorities. So I think that before we impose draconian, some people have said, or whatever kind of regulations, bylaws, however far it goes on people, we have to have our house in order. If they're not happening concurrently, I think it makes us look stupid to be doing this to residents before we have had a chance to discuss that. While I appreciate that future rebuilds in 5 years from now, we want to have a village that reflects our fire safe needs. We're not going to have a village if no one's coming back. And if they keep getting sideswiped by these bylaws and uncertainty, I think we have an opportunity right now to put this to rest. And we can bring it up when building applications start crossing our desk, and maybe they'll be contentious. But at this juncture, I'm not willing to vote in favor of something that's going to bring us back into an area of uncertainty for people that are building, because we will not have a rebuild if we keep doing this to people.
Councillor Lightfoot.
I'm going to speak in favor of the motion.
Okay.
I think it has got a good balance. I think we want to educate people. I think we need to have bylaws. I know in my term as mayor, residents would complain about absentee owners of property and the high grass behind the property, and the bylaw allowed us to go in and clean it up. We always give the owners the opportunity.
We have that.
And yeah, but this, you know, it'll be revamped, perhaps. I think we need to have bylaws. 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 I I also agree that it's not a single shot. We also have to do fuel management, water, irrigation, and, dealing with I'll just say it out loud, the rail lines that run through our community that create a lot of, industrial hazard, I believe. But I think this is part of a good game plan.
CO member Kent.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. Councillor Lightfoot, you've mentioned a couple of times about how in the past we had some, or perhaps a bylaw in place that helped us kind of take action if people didn't keep their own property. Maybe it was under the unsightly premises, but there's no reason why it couldn't be in a landscape management bylaw either. So potentially, you know, they could show up in there. So I just wanted to make that comment. The second one I wanted to make was I don't feel like we're introducing a lot of uncertainty for people here, because the certainty is when you file your building permit application, the bylaws that are in place at that time are the ones you're required to build under. And I think we've been pretty clear that we're not going to move beyond bylaw 710. From a number, right? From a building bylaw perspective, so there's certainly no desire to try to create any uncertainty for anyone. The first priority would just be additional information for people to consider. But bylaw 710 is our building bylaw and is the one that people are required to comply with for rebuilding now.
Okay, Councillor Lightfoot.
If I can just add, I love Councillor McCann's idea of point 4, and especially the word incentives. If the province could provide incentives for people to build in a more resilient manner, that would be a win for everyone. Yes.
Okay, is there no more comments? All those in favor of this motion?
It's not gonna hold us up, right?
And opposed? Okay, and the motion was carried. All right, we're going to move on to Chief Financial Officer, which is item number, I don't even know where we are now, 7.2. And
That's right, Mayor Connor.
yeah, that's a review, Diana again.
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Connor. This item is for council's information. I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention that the Village of Lytton is planning a tax sale for this year. We're required to hold a tax sale under the Local Government Act. And so the tax sale will happen on Monday, September the 25th at 10 a.m. here in Parish Hall. And there was an ad ran, we're required to run 2 ads in the local paper beforehand. The first one ran today, the next one will run next Wednesday. The properties that are on the list, the owners have until 10 a.m. on the 25th of September to pay only the delinquent taxes. So those are the ones that are outstanding from 2021 or before. Because we didn't have a tax sale in the last 2 years, because just with the fire and everything that was happening, there may be people that their delinquent taxes are more than just 2021, but I don't want to discourage anyone from paying their taxes, but they don't have to pay the 22 and 23 in order to avoid tax sale at this time. So that's the first point. The second point that is important for everybody to understand is the tax sale happens on September the 25th, and then the title transfer doesn't happen for another year. The property owner has the 1 year to pay the delinquent taxes and redeem the property and retain ownership of it. So although so nothing is going to be lost as of, you know, September 25th of this year. I have started reaching out to the property owners who are on the list to discuss their situation with them, and had just a little bit of a hiccup there. We've got a staff member that's off for some personal reasons for a couple of days, so I don't have the contact information for everyone, but she's due back tomorrow, and then I'll be able to continue down the list. And so we're making sure that everybody understands what the tax sale means and how they can work with us to avoid that. So like I said, just for council's information, I did plan to have the notice as an attachment, but it seems to be missing. So if anyone would like a copy of that, just let me know. I can send it. Oh, it is there.
Yeah, something.
Oh, okay. Not in my
Yeah, it
worksheet.
wasn't, yeah, see, it was included in the agenda.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that you're contacting each of the property owners directly. That's great. All right, so we have a motion, Councillor Lightfoot.
I'll move that council receive the 2023 property tax sale report dated September 13th, 2023 for information.
And I'll second it. Sure. You. And are there any questions,
Question.
comments? Yes.
I've never come across a tax sale from this position before. And I just had a question about the logistics of it. If a tax sale begins at 10 a.m.
Mhm.
and a potential person to purchase it bidder would have to have the cash by noon.
Mhm.
So how would they know how much they were?
It's a bid, they decide how much they're gonna bid and they come with.
So they're going to have a pre-prepared money order or something to that effect? Okay.
That's right. And that's not untypical
Yeah.
in how these sales are conducted.
I was like, wow, that'd be tight, but I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Perfect. All right, so now we move on to recovery managers. So we have Mike here in person. Provide an update.
Thank you, Mayor. I can make an update. So, go to the next slide. So, a reminder. It's a reminder that we're focusing on a number of streams, but currently mostly focusing on completing the site cleanup, the remediation, completing the archaeology, and now shifting into getting services running right now, interim running. And then starting working on housing, with the priority being focusing on getting people's homes built, sites ready for building. Next slide. So it's been a very active few weeks on the site. So people should have seen lots of changes. We finalized the remediation for most sites, so still be a few. We finalized the archaeology work for most sites. There's still might be a few left over. We're finalizing the removal, in which we have. We've completed the removal of most soils that were on the streets in the main part of town. We're still up the hill. We've got some that need to be sieved yet. But there's just one small pile left that needs to be either relocated or start doing some sieving on it. But that's the only one that's left. Zone 1, we've essentially complete. There's a bit of sculpting that needs to be done, but we've done the backfill. We've done our compaction on there. Every foundation that we filled has passed the geotech tests. They were happy with we had to remove some organics on the site, so we've hired people who are doing that, and everyone passed successfully. So and the geotech was very happy with the work that was done there as well. As this document was prepared in advance of this, we said Zone 2 anticipated cap and fill complete approximately September 12th. It was complete on September 12th. So we're sticking to our schedule. So, you know, I get a good guesser award, I think, for that one. So that one is then getting small sculpting on that, but it's basically ready. We'll work with the owners now, going on the site specifically and say, where do we want to do something? There's people who want to change berms or something. We'll be working there. Work plan for Zone 3 was submitted, waiting for review. The work plan was approved by the endorsed by the Cumberland Heritage Committee last night. We received our notice this morning at 9 o'clock from the archaeological branch that we could proceed at 9:01. The first load went on to Zone 3, and we started work on Zone 3. So it's proceeding now. And going well. We're starting to take down fences. People see disappearing blue fences. You see, we actually have to put forklifts back on the front of some machinery, so we can move fencing off. So we're moving off as quick as, which is basically all of it in Zone 1. I think almost all of it in Zone 2 is now off. There's a couple areas with a protected and open excavation that needs to remain open, and we're starting to peel fencing off Zone 3 already. So. Next slide. So again, zone 1 largely complete, I would say complete. Zone 2 at 75 is, I'd say 95. Zone 3, KDC approval, again, endorsement. So we've got zone 4 and 5 management decision letters are now, they're doing their peer reviews, they're being exchanged. So we'll have more update, but we assume those will probably by next week, they'll be in the process for getting approval. 4 and 5 are done. 6 is under development, 7's in a draft report. So things are going, proceeding. Now, 6 and 7 are more difficult projects, so we're trying to get ahead, but we're still proceeding at a pace that we anticipated proceeding on. You see the map for people where we're starting. Zone 1 is starting at the bottom, and you see the map. So proceed. We'll give a little bit more detail. I think there's the meeting tomorrow evening. Jump into a little bit more specifics on this. So stay tuned for step 2. Next one. Next slide. So just show what's going on. You may not remember, but we were doing the initial fill in the dark almost. It was pretty smoky conditions when we started that. So one of the agreements, and it's actually a really good solution that will work for other jurisdictions, is to preserve and protect the archaeological heritage in there. We lay out the fill in advance of the machinery using bulldozers and equipment to actually move it. We essentially create a roadbed as we go forward. And where we had issues when we tried to do the first fill, we were in conflict with some soils. We didn't have any. I mean, we proceeded through 3 with, under very close and appropriate supervision. We had no failures on that. This worked. It provided a very clear way to operate. So then, and once we've done that, we now are able to go back and do the sculpting where we're not saying, well, if we do this, we might touch this. No, we've actually got really a barrier, a protective barrier that protects us from environmental issues, protects us from damaging the archaeological heritage, but allows us now to move fairly quickly. So you see the geotech taking site compaction tests. So when we're a thin layer, we're able to roll that and do sample testing. When we're filling the excavations, what we do is we put a layer down typically about 12 to 18 inches. We compact it, we use water, we get a measure. Okay, we're good. Okay, we then drop another lift on it, similar levels until we build. So some may be 3 feet, some may be 4, 5. So in every case we do that, in every case, every layer passed. We didn't have to go back, we've got them all done and they're successful. And you see the capping image of what it looks like, people who haven't had a chance to drive by and see it. We're getting there. We've almost got it to bowling alley type compaction levels, right? So really happy with the way it's going. The soil we get from the fill we get from Lytton First Nation is amazing. The 3-inch crush is really good, high degree loam work, and really good material, and it really compacts well. It contours well. I'm very happy with what we're getting. Next image. So again, we're still working on addressing leaks and temporary repairs to get everyone going. And another resident was turned on this week, so that's she was able to move into her place, and we had our crew come down and help her take some material off her property and stuff. She's now moved in there, and the water working and the sewer working. So that's going, and we'll keep doing that. Our public works department do a great job there. I'm not allowed to say Brian. Okay. Can I get next one? So, we continue to meet with Mennonite Disaster Relief, and they were out here on the weekend and Saturday, and we put some connections with people together, which has helped them move along. I met on site with Liam Construction to look at our schedule, make sure we can match with what they're doing, and so they seem to be very happy with that. We have a few foundational removal things we have to get done, but they're aware of it. We're aware. We're worked out a plan for that. We met with timber marts looking for areas where they could store materials. So they wanted to know what our schedule was. So we met with them last week. One of the things we're very happy about, council approval of the batch plant, and when we talked to everyone who's ecstatic about that, including for particularly like Mennonite disaster relief, need to go in there. This is a major win. And we met with cooperators because one of the things they're looking at is where can they, as responsible investors, look at investing money into the community, particularly what we're doing. And one of the things they're going to look at is, could they be like an interim funder to encourage Pacific Can upgrades? Can they actually do the funding through the builders to help them? So they're going to go away and look at that. We talked to a couple of builders, say, would this be something you'd be interested in? They said, heck yes, that would make everything a lot easier. So we're putting people together to help do that. And we're working on finding ways to fast track permits. And so, and sort of housing, we're also, investigating the BC Housing current program, whether it fits us or not. So that'll go for business, commercial, just commencing with the backfill. So we're now moving into some of the commercial properties. With former, Rivers Inn, we're in there, and the grocery store site, we're on there today. So we're starting on those sort of properties right now. And next slide. Again, same thing, applications in for federal funding are going, proceeding. Parish Hall, again, increased use. It's nice to see it. It was rocking on Saturday. Again, really thankful to our partners out there, MATCOM, IBI, and AEW, who have all contributed to both make that happen, but we're able to raise surplus funds that we're able to now support Riverfest on. So, and the Saturday band concert, and what I heard from people was, they'd like to see that now on Friday and Saturday evenings, and it's gone back to the music community in Vancouver, who a couple of them all reached already out saying, when can I play there? So, let's see, next slide. And so, if you like what you heard, that's us. If you didn't, that's not us. So, but it's been, I sound really up. It's been a really great few weeks from a difficult summer going through and get everything going. It was frustrating. We feel like it's really working on the site. We really feel like we're working well with the contractors. We're working well with the archaeologists. We seem to have a really good rhythm of solving problems and moving and going forward that we sort of hadn't felt at the start. We do feel we have it now. So that's what we are.
Good, thank you. That's great. Councillor Lightfoot.
I just have one question, because I don't know and you can tell me. The old Trans-Canada Highway, there's like 4 properties up there. What zone is that considered?
I think most of those are coming into 4 and 5 because it sort of goes up the hill, but they are on our list to get done.
Okay.
And we are going up there. The zone sort of transfers there between there and basically the bank. So.
And there's just the one that accesses from the main highway, right? Which is above the resort.
Yeah, there's one from there and then one that we access, or a couple we access from behind the. So we've been out there having a look. We got to do a little bit more clearing and grubbing to.
So those homeowners have contacted you and have had conversation? I know a couple of them were.
Some of them reached out to us. We've also just been up there looking at the sites because there's some questions I don't understand where some material there where it came from. So we're trying to resolve that.
Right.
So we're aware that that is going to be one of the more challenging areas, and also Zone 7. We know we're going to have some challenges in Zone 7. We have to resolve some ancestral remains that are there on the site. We have a very tricky site adjacent to the reserve.
So zone 7 between Main Street and CP and zone 7 between Main Street and CN, can they be divided so that one doesn't hold up the other? Because I would suspect that our current location here is the more sensitive one.
Yeah, we do. We'll take very specific sites, even though we may think we're going to do definitely Zone 7 is an example. 66 Main will be a very specific work plan. So it's, even though it's the partners, it'll be not within the Zone 7 work plan, other than we're doing it, but it's a very specific work plan for that one.
I'm just asking because I know there's a couple of homeowners, on Station Road, I guess it would be in 7th or whatever, that
have been trying to plan their rebuild. And
So we're seeing that starting to happen, and that's some of the challenges as we go forward, because part of our project is doing the backfill and getting the sites ready. But then when the owner now is applying for a permit, there's another archaeological element to what they're going to be doing. And so there's a bit of overlap that goes on. They have different flexibilities. They can bring in their own archaeologists that are different than we're using. But there's still going to have to be very much a collaborative effort. Like we have to make certain because we'll be doing the fill and make sure we're not causing something that's happened that's hurting the permit process.
well, given how
Okay,
much
thank-
progress we've seen in the last 3 weeks, I think that things are looking good. And before the snow flies, maybe everyone will be probably rebuilding.
So, Councillor McCann.
Sorry, Mike. Just way back when we talked about Alonzo Way and the geotech challenges with Alonzo Way and up in there. And is that another one of your specific sites that you're gonna have to pay special attention to? Because there's a number of houses up for homes. that
So
were
we
up there.
actually have on this Friday, we have both the geotech, who's the soil geotech, and we have a structural engineer for geotech coming in, and we're looking at up on the hillside and seeing what issues we've got to start. Particularly, we're very concerned with some retaining walls in there. and
Right,
getting that. So that's a structural.
That's the question, is the village gonna be putting in the retaining walls? I presume that's part of it.
We're gonna look at what the challenge is and what the finance and authority. So we're really sort of exploring that. Every time we go, we look at the site. So there were some retaining walls in zone 2. So we met with the geotech on site. What do we need to do with those? Look at those and say, well, those are, in that case, decision was those are actually 45-degree angled landscape retaining walls. They're fine state. They meet our requirement. But when we're going to get into some of the truly structural ones, we need to bring a structural engineer. So on Friday, we have a structural engineer from Mekora on site.
So can we anticipate something in council then regarding retaining walls, that sort of
As
thing?
we start getting into those and what will, because there may be, we're solving things in the backfill, but now we're back to some retaining wall issues, and then there'll be other site services issues. There's a lot of things that the backfill is the 90% of what we need to do. There's still a lot of other things that will continue to come back.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? No? Okay, so we have a motion. Would like to move.
I'll move that council receive the recovery rebuild report dated September 13th, 2023 information.
And seconder? I'll second. So Michelle, all those in favor?
Yes.
All right, now we move on to number 7. Something to upgrade, replace the village's water communications system. And are we turning this over to Dawn Wong? So please, Dawn is on the Zoom.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes.
We good?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, this report is just following up on the previous water repair update report. As we're shifting, we've done some of the repairs starting with Ponderosa Way. Now we're shifting towards the actual treatment plants, well 2, talking about well 3 and whatnot, and primarily the communication systems with them. So just as context, as you know, a lot of the water treatment was turned off during the fire back in 2021, as well as there was quite a bit of damage to things like the radio systems. The primary need for these upgrading communication systems is not just to keep an eye on things, but really it's about compliance and redundancy. It allows the village to stay compliant under Interior Health Authority, so to continue to have potable drinking water, as well as to provide levels of redundancy. So in case there's anything else that happens again, there's always a backup. For example, one of the items that we requested is radio equipment and radio repeaters. That is just as a backup, because there'll still be hardline, like fiber connected internet systems connecting the system together. The village went out with requested 3 quotes. one from Exceed Engineering, one from Centrix, and one from Comcom. The one that came back at the lowest bid that met all the requirements was Exceed Engineering. We're recommending that the village award a contract to Exceed to upgrade and replace the village's water communication systems so we can be in compliance with the Interior Health Authority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Don. We have a motion to put forward. Who would like to?
Lost my place.
I'll make
Councilor
a
Michelle?
motion that council award a contract to Exceed Engineering to upgrade and replace the village's water communication systems.
And a seconder? Okay, thank you, Councilor Toss. Now, are there any questions or comments for Don? Councilor Lightfoot?
I'm not sure it's relevant and maybe it's been looked after already, but when we did a tour of the water system a while ago, and I had heard it previously, well 2 seems to have a issue with overheating and it's been suggested that some sort of cooling fans need to be placed in there. Is that outside of the scope of this particular grant, or is it something that's already been done, or is it just something that's still on the list?
If I could, because that's like 3 things, could I address all 3 points?
Sure.
It's within the scope of this grant. We're putting it in. There's been a temporary fix that's been put on, and we were going to put a more permanent fix as part of it all. But it's outside of this communication systems.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Councilor Lightfoot?
I'm just curious, I don't know any of these contractors. Are they, I don't know if I'm just curious, but historically I like to see exactly what the quotes are so that it's apples and apples and not one has a little extra on the side. But where do these 2 companies come from? Are they local?
Primarily out of Kamloops. Centrix is a large company. It's I believe they have places all over BC and the States as well. Exceed is out of Kamloops primarily. I think some of the work from Centrix that we got done last time within the village came out of Kelowna. So they are BC, primarily BC companies. They were both recommended from Kevin, the holder of the water license from the city of Merritt, as well as actually the city of Kamloops recommended those 2 as well.
Is there some sort of warranty with this work? I only ask because it's a relatively new system, and I know that the fire probably damaged some of the components, so that's why we're back here reinstalling some of this equipment. But is there any kind of warranty or time frame where
for the update, for this update, yeah, all the parts will be warranted as well as the work.
for
I don't have that right on the tip of my tongue, but it's for a number of years.
okay.
Thank you, Don. Are there any other questions or comments?
I do have a question.
Councilor McCann?
How old is the system we're replacing, Don?
Different parts of it are different ages. One of the issues that we're having with the system is the ability for redundancy. The current system, we've been trouble. I guess that's one of the reasons there was a boil water advisory for so long. There's been trouble getting parts and replacement parts. One of the requirements that IHA said is essentially we should be able to plug and play from different suppliers that are available locally within BC, right? Hence the upgrade to the current SCADA, to the suggested SCADA pack, as well as the PLC and the radio equipments.
And local people, then if there's somebody here in an emergency and the roads are closed, which they often are, somebody here might be able to actually fix something, or would it take somebody coming from Kamloops to do it anyway?
No, somebody here should be able to fix something. That was part of the discussions we're having with LFN. They're running a lot of the similar systems. So there's going to be a lot more give and take and go back and forth. Let's be honest, it's Lytton. You can't run out to Home Depot to pick something up just to replace it. It needs to be something that can be repairable on the spot and have that ability for communications no matter what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Are there any other questions, comments? So all those in favor of this motion? And carried. Now we move on to item number 8, bylaws. We have the zoning amendment bylaw, RVs as temporary housing. And Corey, you are on, and I believe you will speak to this.
Yes, I will. Just sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so we've had quite a bit of discussion prior to bringing us to this point, but we believe the best outcome or the best way forward at this point is to consider a zoning amendment bylaw. So I'm going to provide some background for the public so that they're aware of the things that we have gone through, staff and council, to reach this point and discover the rationale. So I'll just move through the slides. There is going to be quite a bit of information because we did have quite a bit of discussion. However, council asked us to see what we could do in terms of allowing RVs as temporary housing while people are rebuilding their homes. So some of the things that we considered were that, obviously temporary accommodations are needed by both property owners and workers, during the rebuilding phase. So we outlined some options on how we might assist landowners who wish to reside in their RV on a temporary basis while rebuilding. Council discussed those options at a workshop on August the 2nd, and then subsequently we received guidance from legal counsel, and some of that perspective informed our next steps. And so we are bringing forward this proposed zoning bylaw amendment for your consideration. If you are in agreement with providing readings to this bylaw, we will plan for a public hearing. We will be circulating, again, if you grant readings to the bylaw, we are prepared to send out tomorrow referrals to all of the agencies that we generally send things to receive their comments back before the public hearing. So that's sort of where we're at. So here are a list of the options that we discussed at the August 2nd meeting. And I'm providing these for transparency so you can see the evolution of the conversation, if you will. So they were included, the original options were included in a comparison table, and that is attached to the council report. So discussion included consideration of both the positive and the negative consequences of each solution. And then legal counsel subsequently eliminated what we thought might be an option 4, on the basis that it wasn't sound in law, which was good guidance. He advised us that while local governments are not obliged to enforce all bylaw violations and can establish enforcement policies regarding selective enforcement, a policy that essentially seeks to permit something that has been otherwise prohibited in the zoning bylaw is deemed unlawful. So we took option 4 off the list. So recognizing, as we've discussed many times before, that land use is best addressed with the tools provided in the Local Government Act and the Community Charter, we're suggesting this bylaw amendment. So some of the items that we discussed were the readiness of the land for residential use. You've just had an update in terms of the archaeological readiness, the geotechnical work that is ongoing by zones. So we talked a little bit about that as context for moving things along. Then we then looked at the OCP objectives. We discovered that making the proposed amendment that we are putting before you this evening would be consistent with the spirit of the official community plan, and that was a good thing. It meant we didn't need to amend the official community plan to bring this forward. We then looked at existing zoning and building bylaw regulations, considered what the timeline for implementation of the various options would be, talked about construction site hazard mitigation, and then housing, fire, and life safety issues that are usually addressed through building code that we wanted to think about, and then recognize that there needs to be continued road access for both people coming in, but people leaving in the case of an emergency. Fire and life safety responders, BC Ambulance Service, et cetera, need to be able to reach sites where there's work ongoing and where people are residing. So we considered those things. Then we thought a little bit about conflict mitigation and some enforcement issues. Are we ready to start enforcing, or what might we encourage people to do without broaching the enforcement subject? We talked about neighborhood character, recognizing that building a permanent community remains our primary objective. And then we talked a little bit about liability and risk mitigation and what that might look like for the village. So we want to protect both the village and the property owners. Additional considerations were the lot sizes in the village are fairly small. And so there's a challenge to fit an RV and have formal construction that meets the zoning bylaw in each lot. So each lot will have to be looked at individually. The life safety regulations contained in the building code or things that property owners need to be really aware of aren't accounted for in the construction of an RV. So we just want to make people aware of the health and safety considerations. There's also the health and safety considerations of water and sewage disposal. So again, we wanted to make sure property owners are really aware of these things. And when they enter into an agreement to have their RV and to be residing there, that they have recognized and provided us confirmation that they understand those risks factors. Temporary hydro service. It appears that it would be possible in some cases. It may need to be temporary, and the permanent service would be an additional cost. But those are things that would have to be looked at again on a case-by-case basis. Temporary frost-free service connections may be an issue that property owners will have to consider. We talked about whether we wanted to think about performance security, and I think we came to the place where we said, really think people are probably motivated by the right things, that we don't need to secure monies in order to ensure that they will follow the bylaw. So we're really hoping people engage in a positive way with the provisions that we've outlined. We talked about extent of authority, and I mentioned that the legal counsel removed the policy option from our list. And then we thought about other applicable regulations. So we need to recognize, while the village can talk about their laws, we are not able to waive or make special considerations for other provincial regulations. All those will continue to apply regardless. So the proposed solution was informed by a few things, other local government precedents, which are outlined in the council report. We talked about the village being able to require landowners to apply for zoning bylaw amendments on a case-by-case basis, and determined that that really wasn't consistent with our desire to assist people move forward with this as a permitted use. So that's why we're bringing a general regulation forward to you that would apply to everyone in the village equally. That way it is fair and equitable application of the rules, if you will. So while Consideration of each property individually certainly would provide an opportunity to assess and address varying circumstances that would require substantial time and resources. So, as I said, we've thought this overall application of a solution was perhaps consistent with what we heard during the discussion. So this would be, we believe, the most immediate response to community needs. So we are suggesting that you as council provide readings to this bylaw at your initiative, so that it might help people move forward. So one of the things we need to do to the zoning bylaw is define recreational vehicle. And we decided that borrowing, if you will, the definition that is currently used in the regional district that surrounds the village seemed like a very reasonable place to start. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we're suggesting that that be adopted into the village's bylaw. It creates regional consistency, which always makes it easier for people inside and outside the village to be understanding the same parameters. So the next thing we suggest, as I say, these general regulations. So we would add additional subsections to the general regulations, and then subsequent subsections were renumbered after them. So 3.36 and 3.7 seem to incorporate all the things that we had previously considered including in a policy in a way that is as friendly as we can pretty much make it, while still recognizing we're dealing with all of these issues and whatnot that have been identified. So we would assume that this would be something that happens when someone's been issued a building permit, that these issues, or these issues, I guess, would be addressed by the property owners. So they would sort out where on the land their RV would be placed, recognizing that we don't want to see RVs placed on public property. So that must remain on the lot. And we felt it was appropriate that it would be limited to one RV per lot in order to maintain some semblance of order, if you will. A building permit is valid for 2 years, and we would anticipate people would proceed with construction in a timely way. And if they needed to apply for an extension of that building permit for one reason or another, obviously they could extend the time that the RV was there as well. But for the most part, we expect people will probably take occupancy of their home within that 2-year period, and that the RV would cease to be used for residential purposes at that time. And we can talk later at some future date if we want to talk about limiting the size of RVs that can be parked on individual residential parcels. Or for the time being, we haven't put any limitations of that nature on this. So these are the regulations. I won't read through them in detail. They are outlined in the attachment 2, which is the proposed zoning bylaw. And obviously we will review each one of them in detail should we proceed to public hearing. Basically, I think this is the most logical way forward that we could find. It does seem to be a fairly lengthy list of regulations, but in order to safeguard the community, we believe that these suggestions are relevant, and then from there, if there are tweaks needed in future, we can certainly consider those things. But most of these things are consistent with residential occupancy of lots in any case, such as the garbage removal and that sort of thing. So again, while this is incorporated in a bylaw, we recognize that the village will then have the option of how and when such regulations would be enforced. In the absence of a bylaw enforcement policy right now, we're really, as I said, looking for cooperation amongst property owners and between property owners, the public utilities and the village. So one of the things that we really believe it would be helpful to make people really aware of the risks that they're taking on by placing an RV on their lot is that they provide a statement to the village that they have read and understood the rules and that they accept the risks associated with it. It's one of those things that just gives a little bit of protection and makes communicating the requirements they will have to sign it before they'll be able to do it. And so we will know that everyone is aware of council's wishes in this regard. So it also serves to save the village harmless should there be some legal questions in the future. Anyway, a couple of things that came up that we hadn't originally considered are things like making sure that the property taxes are not in arrears. We want to make sure, again, we're safeguarding the community from potential negative consequences. So that's what some of these regulations try to adjust. So we expect that a property owner will restore their lot to residential uses once they take occupancy of their home. If they want to store their RV there, that'd be great, but we'll discourage living in them once there's a home to be occupied. Anyway, that concludes my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And so I'll stop sharing my screen now and mute myself. I'll be here to answer questions if you have any for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. We have a motion go forward. Thank you, Councillor Lightfoot.
I move that council consider giving first and second readings to zoning amendment bylaw number 740, 2023, and that a public hearing be scheduled.
And seconder? Sure. Councillor McCann. All right, do we have any comments or questions?
Councillor Mitchell, we start us off.
Did we agree to one per lot?
Exactly.
Because,
There's a lot in here that I feel
There's-
this is never discussed.
I can't see construction workers sharing an RV. Right, so if we're using it for our contractors, I'm not gonna ask them to share an RV.
No.
That's ridiculous.
Councillor Lightfoot?
I mean, maybe it's not my place, but your particular situation has a couple of lots. But if you're building a house, how many RVs can you actually put on site and still have construction happen? That's your question. Because, I was thinking about it earlier today when I read it, and I was thinking, okay, I guess if you put your.
I've only got a 50 by 100 lot, they can park at the back where my RV was parked.
Sorry.
That's okay. Councillor Thompson.
Absolutely, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. I feel like some of this hasn't necessarily come through council as a suggestion, like the one per lot, the one RV, or even putting like a time requirement on between the residential occupancy of the RV must cease prior to the consideration of a final occupancy permit. Well, ostensibly, there's going to be at least a week or a day. What are we going to kick people out on the street? I see that there's also, one that wasn't discussed and not necessarily something that everybody wants, and they could be smaller RVs. I also don't see any reason why property owners that have a friend that isn't yet ready to develop couldn't put their RV on their lot while they're developing their lot. Why does it have to be on the lot where you're building? There's property owners here in the village that own multiple lots that might choose to have their RV or what have you, their temporary structure, and live on their other lot while they. So I don't know that has to be in the bylaw. So I think we have to massage this a little bit. I would support it if some of this was taken out of it. Or I suppose if we do a first reading tonight, that gives us an opportunity to massage this a little, but again, even the garbage pickup, that's such a subjective, unenforceable thing. What is garbage to one person isn't garbage to another, especially in a development situation when you're building a home. You're going to have excess, material that'll be on your property for hopefully a short amount of time, but this does not seem to be the place to put that. I would support a first reading, but that's it at this point.
Thank you. Other comments? So McCann, do you have anything to
My
add?
only comment was that I understand the time thing. I'm not sure that the mechanics of exactly how it's worded right now are perfect, but I understand that the intention is to ensure that we don't create a village of RVs. That's the intention. So we want to have a permanent village. So making sure that somehow, however it's massaged, that still is the outcome, right? So perhaps it's a tweak here and a tweak there, but nonetheless, I think we need to kind of make sure that that is the case. So if there's a reason why there should be more than one RV on a lot, then say so, and just kind of be able to identify those issues, clean it up, and at the same time still maintain, like, you want to get that done quickly. How long is it going to take to go through that process of making it perfect? And what can you ignore and what do you have to really stick with? It's kind of all the questions I think we're going to need to be addressing as this goes ahead. But I'm with you on moving it forward at least tonight, get it started.
Can I just get some clarification? So first and second reading, and then we have a public hearing. So a public hearing is an opportunity for public to provide some input as well. And at that point, it can be massaged, I think is the word, or changed or reworded to add. So this isn't a done deal at all. We're not voting on this bylaw tonight. It's definitely, there's lots of room for an opportunity for changing it, addressing some of the comments and concerns tonight. So we can still do that after a second reading?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Toss?
Just another comment I meant to bring up where there's no overnight parking on public roads or property will be permitted. Again, I think, and like perhaps that could be tweaked to something like a maximum of 3 nights or something. So someone that's coming through town, checking on their property, can park in front of it. What the heck? Why are we going to make them go a mile out of town? So yeah, that would be another tweak I'd recommend maybe perhaps for second reading.
Other comments? Councillor Lightfoot?
I think if someone drives their RV into town to look at their property and just parks on the street, they're not using that as a residence. I think this bylaw in particular is like for a long term, for weeks or months or whatever, not overnight. Anybody can park on the street.
Thank you for that. I was thinking the exact same thing, that this is addressing
Long
people
term.
coming longer term while the rebuilding is happening, not coming on a weekend to visit or an overnight to visit.
So we can stipulate that perhaps in the
Yeah.
revised version.
Okay. All right. Oh, Councillor Lightfoot.
I'm just curious, perhaps our CIO or maybe Alba, or I'm not sure if Shannon's still on. If you take it to public hearing and it's kind of what you think you're gonna go with. And if, I mean, at the public hearing, you might hear things that have you change it, but if you didn't hear anything at the public meeting and you changed it, would the public feel sort of like we tricked them into being complacent? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd like to hear what Shannon's thoughts are on that from her experience. Are you there, Shannon?
Stepped out for a cup of coffee.
We gotta keep it going. We're interested.
Corey? Yes, Corey?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to council. Sometimes these things happen for sure, where you take it forward. You may have to, if you make substantial changes to the bylaw, you would have to give it a new second reading and a new public hearing, I believe. So I absolutely hear what you're saying in terms of some of the things that we listed. There were basically, we just took everything that was touched on, whether it was in the policy or how it was brought forward, and things that we thought about from the various examples that we saw, and we put them there. I would concur with you. We understood you wanted to move things ahead quickly, and so we haven't had time. I fully expect that we'll receive some comments from the referral agencies that may well need to be integrated into the bylaw before we proceed. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to go forward if that is the way you wanted to proceed. I'm happy to accept first reading, and we'll send the referral out tomorrow. And as I say, I'm sure that we're going to likely hear from some of the agencies, and that may influence your decision in terms of what the final bylaw looks like as well.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lightfoot.
I know that it's not a perfect document by everyone's standards, but I really think it would be prudent to take it to second reading, have a public hearing, and hear what the public has to say, and get the information from the agencies. And if we have to have a second public hearing, we're no further behind. If we have to redo it. We may.
When does public hearing take place? Do you have to have second reading before a public hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so no matter what, we're still gonna be that many weeks.
May I?
Yes, Councillor.
Thank
And
you.
Shannon's gonna be with it.
Okay.
You want to go first, Shannon?
Shannon, would you like to speak?
Sure, I apologize, Your Worship. For some reason, I could not get my sound to work there for a minute. So I was
Okay.
trying to speak, unable. Yes, so how the Local Government Act works is you can make changes up until third reading. You can't make changes until after, and you can't make changes after third reading unless you then backtrack, and then, as I believe Corey mentioned, then you would have to hold another public meeting at that point. But that, like, to Councillor Lightfoot's question, often council will make changes when they're giving third reading, and it's not necessarily exactly what the public was looking for or what they expressed. The important thing is that council listen to the public, but you are elected as the decision makers, and you make your decisions based on the information that you have. So, you wouldn't have to go to public hearing unless you've, after fourth hearing, either after third hearing, maybe potentially receive new information that would make you change your mind and therefore want to amend the bylaw. And at that point, then yes, given that new information, that information has to go back to the public in the form of a new public hearing. Clear as mud?
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, what
Last
else?
question. So just to be clear, Corey, if you can help me out, what the drawback is or what considerations are around doing nothing? And I understand that we don't want a RV village, but if we did nothing, and I hesitate on playing the devil's advocate until there was a problem, let's say we trust that our residents will act respectively on their properties and not start a shanty town, what would happen if we just did nothing? Like absolutely nothing?
It's not, what we were told by legal counsel was that we shouldn't have a rule. Basically, the zoning bylaw doesn't permit residential occupancy of an RV. It doesn't even define RV. So while it is a somewhat blank slate, by council having had these discussions and then making the call to turn a blind eye, we're not following our own bylaws. So it's not best practices, I think is the best way I could put it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor, and I'm going to call the question. So all those in favor of giving first and second reading on this zoning amendment bylaw? And carried. So now we're on to bylaw number 736, lot line and setback definitions. And thank you, Councillor McCann has made the motion to consider giving third reading to zoning amendment bylaw 736. Now, a seconder, please. Councillor Lightfoot, and are there any questions or comments about this one? Forward, nope, seeing none, all those in favor? And carried. And on to item 8.3, zoning amendment bylaw 739, uses. We have a motion to put forward. Councillor Lightfoot. Around council consider giving third reading. Yeah. A seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you. And any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Moving on to verbal reports, it looks like. And I will begin. So for mayor's report. So it does feel like longer than 2 weeks since our last regular council meeting, and during that time, a number of local meetings and events were canceled or postponed. When the weather finally changed and we had full day of rain, that really put a damper on the wildfires in the area. And of course, that thick smoke that we had here left our skies. And of course, the village evacuation alert was lifted. As a village, though, we kept as much work going as we could, as per Recovery Manager Mike's report earlier. On August 29th, I toured along with the council, the village water reservoirs and treatment plant, and it truly, gave me a better understanding of the work that's being done and the needs for the future around our water system. I've attended a few meetings, one with our MP Brad Biss to discuss concerns and ways that he may be able to support us. I attended a TNRD meeting in Kamloops last week. And yesterday, I attended a meeting regarding economic development. One of the highlights of my weeks has been the coffee gatherings that we've had at the parish hall here on Monday mornings. We've had a good turnout of people each week. It's so nice to see not only people who are living here in the village or around the village, but those from the outside communities are joining us as well, from TNRD, from the reserves, that sort of thing, as well as people driving in from other communities, the displaced residents. And just a note on that next Monday, or this coming Monday, the parish hall will be closed for cleaning. And so we won't be having coffee on the 18th. It was so great to see that backfilling starting up and been continuing over these last few weeks. I think we're on our third straight week in a row now. There was some criticism on social media from people about a day when machines stopped working so they could be serviced. But, I want to thank Mike and Dawn in particular, as well as the other staff on the ground, for what we're actually seeing happening in the village in preparation for people to start their rebuilding. Other than seeing actual buildings going up, this is the visual that we need driving through our community. I did have a resident that lives across the river say to me the other day, wow, things are really happening in that village. We're going to get our town back. That really hit me hard. Finally, I want to personally thank the contractors and the Langley Hog Group for the music and barbecue event last Saturday at the Parish Hall grounds here. Such a great way to bring people together, and we know that's so needed. Thank you. That is my report. Now we'll move on to Councillor Toss.
Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. I'll keep it pretty brief. I don't have a lot to report. I also did the tour of the water reservoir and engaged in some meeting, strategic planning and whatnot. I think I'd like to convey to community members and encourage them to reach out with public comment and letters and comments, because a lot of us sitting at the table were the people speaking at the beginning of meetings in the past. And I, for one, would really like to hear more from the public when we have issues come up. So please, folks, participate in those public hearings. Let us know what you're thinking about this RV policy. And of course, tomorrow we have our community meeting at 6:30, which will be a great opportunity to have your questions answered. And then Friday, 11 to 3 here is an in-person community engagement session. So I haven't made it to the Monday coffee, so I'm hoping to see some residents on Friday, and thanking all staff. They're doing a wonderful job, and although I might sound critical of some of the bylaws and things that come before us, I want to express how grateful I am for everyone that puts those reports together, all those comprehensive, all that work. So thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Mine's long, but I'll read fast. How's that? Never gets too big. So I attended a number of events and meetings. So we went to the coffee at the parish hall. And for anyone who wants data, on August 28th, we had 8 visitors to council, CAO member Kett and Brian Baxter come. The topics under discussion that day were bears, upcoming event dates, backfill work being done. And then on August 29th, we did the water system tour as mentioned. And we had a workshop also that day on a detailed work plan review. We discussed things that council will be considering, such as rebuilding, as rebuilding moves forward, such as creating a housing authority and possible future agreements with LFN. September the 4th coffee meeting, there were 14 guests. This was Labor Day Monday. 2 council members were present. Discussion topics included, but were not limited to, updated progress report, rebuilding discussions, insurance issues, fears and hopes regarding rebuilding, and parking. We talked quite a bit about parking and considering angle parking, parking on side streets, underground parking, and maybe even a parkade. See, the important stuff happens on Monday. September 6th, City had a special council meeting at the parish hall regarding the temporary use permit. September 9th, we had fun in the backyard here with the barbecue. I enjoyed the opportunity to relax in the village with friends and family while listening to music. And thank you to Mike for all your work that you did to make that happen. And please let the other organizations know how much this was appreciated. And I'm thinking perhaps our council could even write a letter to that effect to the organizations that were here on the night. And maybe the mayor will just kind of do that. September 11th coffee, that was just the other day. There were 3 council members and 12 people from the public here. There were so many conversations at this session, it was really hard to know what all got discussed. Everybody was pretty lively on Monday. Insurance claims and business restarting challenges were 2 of the things that I heard people talking about at that session. I personally look forward to seeing our council taking on committee responsibilities in the months to come. They're doing that work tonight, and having more opportunities for community input and collaboration at sessions like the one planned for this Friday, September 15th. The UBCM will be a big learning experience for me, and I look forward to meeting and learning from others who represent small municipalities in BC. And upcoming community events in the works include a rescheduled River Festival indoors at Stein Valley School on October 7th and 8th, and an evening of family entertainment on October 2nd, and I'll have more details to follow about that later.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Michelle.
I don't have too much to report between the fire and road closures and that much.
Thank you. Councillor Lightfoot.
On the 29th, I did the workshop with an assistance tour on, I'm doing it quick, I hope. On the 30th, we did our meeting, read this. And then after 2 weeks of really bad air and really depressing atmosphere, we had a light rain and finally got better air, so that was great. However, we did cancel the River Fest for the Labor Day weekend because so many people were still evacuated or out of the community. Again, on the 6th, we had our special use permit meeting. The barbecue last weekend was great. I think It was a hot day. It was one of those hot Lytton days, and it was well appreciated by a lot of people. A lot of people came and came and went. And those meatballs are most excellent. We'd like to see them again, I'm sure. So I'm looking forward to this Friday and hearing a bit more of what community needs and wants.
Great, thank you, Councillor Lytton. So that brings us to the end of this open council meeting. Just before we move into closed meeting, I just want to remind everyone, and please pass the word on, as Councillor Toss said, tomorrow evening we have a Zoom community meeting where we're going to have more detailed updates, more information. And if you have questions, please get them sent in or ask them at that meeting. And on Friday, we have the engagement session here in the hall starting at 11 o'clock. So we hope to see lots of people here then. So please pass that on if you know of other residents, other community members that need to have that information. So we will now move into closed meeting. So
I will move.
Thank you.
That council close the meeting to the public to discuss matters related to the community charter sections as listed.
Great, thank you. And a seconder? Oh, second. Thank you. All those in favor?
Yes.
Carried. And thank you again, community members for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. That concludes the public portion of the meeting for this evening. For public and members of staff, please remove yourself from the meeting as we go into closed session. Thank you very much for attending today's meeting. Good night.